Very warm welcome to Not Why But How, a public policy podcast where big ideas meet real action. Presented to you by the NALSAR Public Policy Group. At Not Why But How, we believe that good ideas are just the beginning. What truly matters is making them work. No ivory towers, no endless debates, just sharp, practical conversations on turning policy into action. My name is Saundarya Nair,
Hi, my name is Kshetragna Pinnamaraju.
and we're delighted to host for this episode of Not Why But How Ms. Anuradha Bhasin, a renowned journalist and the executive editor of the Kashmir Times. She has been a fellow at the Commonwealth Scholarship and Fellowship Plan, as well as a Jonas Knight Fellow at Stanford University. And she has pioneered investigative reporting on the psychological impacts of the Kashmir conflict on civilians of the region. But I believe it's safe to say that among law school circles, she's best known for her writ petition before the Supreme Court of India, with the judgment in Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India, paving the way for restoration of internet access in Kashmir following the abrogation of Article 370 of the Constitution in August 2019, but also having a lot of other repercussions that we hope to explore further in this podcast. So, ma'am, it's an honor to have you with us here today. And we're going to have this conversation broadly along the lines of just exploring what is the scene in India today, what is the scene of our democracy, where do we stand with respect to journalistic freedom, but also more broadly, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And we can start off the first question by addressing the elephant in the room.
Yes, ma'am. We firstly want to talk about the book ban itself. That is, uh, how did you first hear about the dismantle state being banned, and like what went through your mind in that moment?
First of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure talking to you. As far as if I go back, I'm trying to recollect. But I first saw just these very sketchy reports about a book ban on 25 books, not knowing that mine was included in that, and there were some sketchy bits of news, and of course Arundhati Roy being a prominent, more the star author in that list. She was at the top in all headings, and what came as a shock was A.G. Noorani's book. I mean, how can anybody even find fault with an author researcher whose research methods were completely flawless? His way of researching and was amazing, extremely meticulous. And it did sound very absurd, and it at the same time it was a vindication of what I had written, because I'd been writing consistently since the last 6 years about a continuing pattern of suppression of arbitrary actions by the Indian state in Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, that's happening across India, but the exacerbation of suppression of civil liberties, of fundamental rights, of freedom of expression in Jammu and Kashmir is at yet another level. And it was only about an hour or so, I was trying to find out which all books it included, and when it took an hour to realize that my own book was there. And yeah, I mean, the feeling was it felt absurd. It At the same time, it was of vindication of what I was writing. And why it was absurd was because the books, year to year, all books, 25 books, from a different and a very wide range of genres had been clubbed together. There were books on history, there were books on politics, there were books which were extremely old, maybe also religiously radical. And there were books which are known scholarships. They are relied upon by anybody researching on Kashmir. And these are very resourceful books on different issues. And all of them, without placing in evidence, is there any particular word, is there any particular passage that is objectionable? Nothing was placed No evidence was placed except just one or two paragraphs of the notification, which was extremely vague. So it was absurd, it was amusing, but it was also tragic, at the same time.
So, one question I wanted to ask was, what do you feel is the broader repercussions of book bans? Because a lot of times, it's a kind of dystopian situation we read about, starting from books being written back in like the 40s and 50s, which talk about how book banning is one of the first steps of really an authoritarian regime and a totalitarian regime. So, just what are your thoughts on the direction we're kind of heading in with respect to that direction, with respect to that, not just banning of
Mhm.
intellectual work by, I mean, authors, as you mentioned, like A.G. Nurani, whom it's nearly impossible to really find fault with anything that he's written. Where do you think we're heading in the direction as far as freedom of expression in our democracy is concerned?
I'm trying to understand that in modern times. Of course, we used to hear about book bans, and it's not that in India book bans haven't happened before. In my own lifetime, I've seen several, and one of the most memorable ones is the Satanic Verses, over which there were protests in Kashmir in way back in 1988, 89, and there y- but we didn't have sweeping bans like this. And the times have changed because we're living in a digital era when it is difficult to completely push everything into a black hole. In some form or the other, these books, anything that you ban, any banned literature, will remain, will be preserved, will be circulated. And I think that used to happen even in the pre-digital era time, though it was much more difficult to do. There were people who continued to clandestinely publish banned books, circulate them in various forms through pamphlets or through, um, pirated editions or whatever. But now it's much easier. But at the same time, I think it does have a chilling impact, um, uh, particularly in the kind of space like Jammu and Kashmir, where um, y- you know there's completely an Orwellian control being wielded by the Indian state, where a surveillance state has been created, a police state has been created. And this is not just a book ban. The notification says ban and forfeiture. And in a place, in a space, in a region where arbitrary detentions, arbitrary raids, arrests, arbitrary terminations of employees, arbitrary demolitions of houses, which is happening countrywide, but in Jammu and Kashmir it is a little different because you easily tie it to terrorism, and unlike the bulldozers, you can even blow up the houses with dynamite. So that in that kind of a society where there is already fear is so deeply embedded, and where there is a fear of possessing a book, reading a book, and not just the banned literature, but the fear that this could be banned in the future. I think it does have a chilling impact. It has a chilling impact on people who were thinking of writing. We have a talented lot of writers, journalists in Jammu and Kashmir, and unfortunately, they have been silenced under the present kind of a system of militarization and suppression, and which is sophisticated and very methodical, and exercises itself through administrative day-to-day maneuvers. In that, I think it has a more chilling impact. People will stop, people who were thinking of writing, people who want to read, who want to know, who want to gain knowledge. Because when the books disappear from stores, they'll disappear from libraries, and people will be scared to keep them on their personal shelves for fear that these books, their personal libraries, will be weaponized against them. Yeah.
Ma'am, I have a follow-up question to that itself. We talked about the chilling effect that happens and how people then are really reluctant to write per se or express their uh, what they feel. But do you think what does banning books or like expression itself mean to the history and like collective memory of Kashmir itself? Do you think such banning would push more counter narratives against what the state's dominant narrative is, or would it silence narratives like you talked about?
No, I don't think it silences narratives. One, I think negative fallout is that when information is not there in the public domain, the negative fallout is that it encourages a lot of rumor mongering. So, you also have these kind of wild narratives that will continue to persist and which will be difficult in due course of time to kind of sift through and see whether they're authentic or not. However, at the same time, Kashmir is a place, looking at historically, even there have been attempts in the past to silence it through coercion, through intimidation, through various other methods. There has been a period of very volatile insurgency when people were silenced from and caught and sandwiched between the guns of the militants and the state. Were obviously silenced, but then gradually people have come out with their narratives. They have preserved their narratives in some form or the other, in their day-to-day memorialization. It continues to exist, and I'm sure people are silently documenting some of these things. If you look back 10 years ago, particularly Kashmir, I can't say about the other regions of the erstwhile state, but mostly in Kashmir, there was a flowering of creative resistance through theater, through poetry, through art. um, and um, and these were young people involved who had started speaking out in very creative ways, apart from those who were documenting about doing serious civil liberties work, documenting human rights cases and all of that, taking up cases of justice. um, that may have disappeared for now, but I'm sure the more creative resistance must be continuing. And I see some signs of it on the social media, circulation of that. Uh, though the language may have slightly been more subdued, it's become more creative in the ways that people express themselves, because of the fear of the state. um, so that it will eventually, as soon as you cannot sustain this kind of a suppressive atmosphere forever and forever. It's never worked. It's unorganic, and it is unsustainable. So at some point, when this stops working, I think that creative resistance will emerge uh, from the corners and from the shadows.
I'm just building up on that. I think when I was in class 11th, we had a story, 11th or 12th, we had a story by Agha Shahid Ali in our NCRT textbook. And before school started, I remember reading that story. And that was my favorite piece of literature in the entire course curriculum, like across all the subjects. It was
Mm-hmm.
not by him, actually, it was a story by Amitabh Ghosh about him. And it
Oh,
included
yes.
some yeah, I think you know the one I'm talking about. So it included some references to his work, but more than that, it was about him as an individual and his how his creative output was
Mm-hmm.
inherently rooted in his experiences as a Kashmiri person growing up at what I would probably call was the peak of state violence at the time. But interestingly enough, that chapter was deleted out of our syllabus that year, and I don't think it's been revived since then. So I do feel that even while creative counter narratives emerge from Kashmir itself, there is such a concerted effort by the state to suppress it, not just in Kashmir, but even narratives related to Kashmir, outside of Kashmir. There's definitely a conscious effort that kind of emerges. But you talked about the chilling effect, and I think that was also something that was recognized in the court case that you fought. The Supreme Court, if I'm not wrong, noted, that when we talk about the violation of fundamental rights, it's not just about the reasonability and the proportionality and the necessity of the measure itself, but also the chilling impact that a certain measure can have, the broader repercussions it can have on the civilians of a nation and on the civilians
Mm-hmm.
or a people essentially. So would you connect this kind of suppression of creative impulse that is emerging from Kashmir and is in some way rooted in Kashmir? How would you think that that chilling effect that you talked about and that the court talked about plays into the larger narrative of freedom in India, not just journalistic freedom, but freedom of expression and of thought and of speech? How would you say that you would draw a parallel between the two?
Yeah, it's difficult, but the more you try to, I think the more you try to suppress, the more it will eventually emerge. I mean, right now the road looks extremely difficult. You look at it, you talked about Aka Shahid Ali, and that story. I remember my daughter in class. If you say class 11, I don't remember the exact class, but she had that chapter at one time. His family was they were close family friends. I think Shahid Ali and Amitabh Ghosh were very good friends too. But Aga Shahid Ali's book and some other books, I mean, he's one of the finest poets of Kashmir, writing in English, known worldwide. And his works were banned in the university. Um, and struck off the syllabus, so that's quite absurd. But it's not that people will stop reading it. They'll read it more and more. And I think eventually the more you suppress the people, the more you arouse their curiosity. Right now, as I said, the times are difficult, and not just in Kashmir, where voices have been suppressed beyond a point. The more you throttle and crush people, and then I'm seeing it even, as in very recent months, not just the book ban, you've had the after the Pahalgam incident, the follow up of that, how they tried to further use the Pahalgam killings to further crush people in Kashmir, even though they came out and spoke openly against terrorism. How it created a security, it made the security situation in India more vulnerable, and particularly in Kashmir, with the 3-day war between India and Pakistan. We've seen the climate impact of this government's aggressive development policies. And, so people are gradually speaking out. We're seeing that happen now. There's a Hazrat Bal crisis over the plaque with the Ashoka emblem and its alleged defacement. So I think there is extreme, the more you suppress people, there would be more resentment. And people at some point will stop being silent. We're seeing that happen in India, and right now just last week we had a very dismal, court hearing on the bail application of Umar Khalid and several other students, youth, I think, um, who we look up to as very bright people in whose hands the future of India is safe and good, and who continue to languish in jails, silenced, and invisibilized, just kept out of circulation. And but there will be a time, the more you suppress, the people will, you there is within a society an inherent way of reacting and responding to extreme suppression at some point in time. So the society will rise, the civil society will rise, the liberal voices will rise, and that's my belief.
I'm really glad you led into that, ma'am, because we did want to ask you about the bail denial of Umar Khalid and the other student activists at the time who are still languishing in jail 4 years in.
Mhm.
And I believe just today, Gulfi Shah Fatma approached the Supreme Court challenging, again, petitioning for bail. So, what do you feel about this? I mean, without any technical jargon, just what are your feelings about this? Not even thoughts, I would say. What are your feelings about this as a journalist?
Layered, very, very layered. I mean, firstly, I'm deeply saddened because, these are Omar Khalid I met personally, and the others I got to know after they were in jail. And I've been following what they've been saying, what they've been writing, even from jail. And they're just so impressive. They don't deserve to be there. I mean, these are very creative people. These are mature youngsters. I feel proud of them. I feel sad for them. And there's also a sense of guilt that, for that while they are suffering. And we don't get to suffer as much for what they say because of their identity. And that, yeah, that brings a sense of guilt as well. Maybe a survivor's guilt, or call it whatever. And the inability to collectively do something for them.
Ma'am, in both your book and several columns of yours, you talk about how what is happening in Kashmir is like a mirror of India's democracy itself. But do you think the rest of India, or do you think the rest of India is starting to see this link, or this idea that is coming from my childhood itself, that this Kashmir is like in the perpetual state of exception still dominant?
No, sorry, can you repeat? I didn't.
Yes. Since my childhood, there is this underlying dominant narrative that Kashmir is constantly in the constant or perpetual state of exception, right? And that is what justifies whatever subjugation of what is happening in Kashmir right now. In both your book
Mhm.
and columns, you talked about how what is happening in Kashmir is a mirror itself to India's democracy. It's not just a Kashmir problem. Do you think the rest of India is starting to see this link, or do you think the idea that Kashmir is still in a state of exception still dominate?
I think sometimes it's still an exception, and it will continue to be an exception. And it's been always normalized. I think even in my growing up years, which were the best period, probably the 70s and the early 80s, that was probably the best time in Jammu and Kashmir. And but even when I look back, there was so much abnormality which didn't exist in other parts of India, at least not in mainland India. And that now it looks abnormal. But we tended to normalize it because that was our daily life. That was how anybody outside Jammu and Kashmir also normalized, because that's how they saw Kashmir, always through a very security lens, always through a very ultra nationalistic lens. And they continue to, unfortunately, even many liberals continue to see Kashmir from that lens. In so there will always be a tendency to view Kashmir as you know as a state of exception, um, unless and until India's civil society, which is trying to fight for restoration of democratic rights, understands that that democracy applies as much to Kashmir, which cannot be seen simply as a piece of territory, which or be seen from a security lens. You know, it is a land which comprises of its people. If the land is integral to India, the people are also integral to India, and the people can't be seen as an exception. um s- and I find this, I feel that there is a greater need for interaction between the civil society in India and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And the people of Jammu and Kashmir are not a homogene. In fact, it's a very complex land itself. Um, it's divided between the Pakistan administered territories and the Indian administered territories. And even if we're talking about the Indian administered side, it's just so diverse. You have the Jammu province towards the south, which is Hindu majority, but its hilly areas are more Muslim majority. And then you have Kashmir, which is overwhelmingly Muslim, and then you have Ladakh, which I would still count as part of Jammu and Kashmir, and which is which has an equal number of Buddhists and Muslims. And they all have very diverse aspirations, and diverse ideologies. So we haven't even had conversations within. So we need these kind of conversations to be able to understand each other as humans, leave alone see each other as co-citizens of the same country. But to be, and those conversations haven't happened. I say this because even till very recently I've been part of some of these civil society dialogues that keep happening. And I see how many liberal Indians, when it comes, whenever Kashmiris talk about their suffering, um, you feel that they haven't been listened to. Because then it's all about, oh yes, this also happens in our cities, there is an insecurity. And there is an attempt to unhear the voices of Kashmiris who are saying, oh, this is happening to us not because there is crime in our city, but because the state is taking away our rights. That state of insecurity is happening because the state is constantly crushing us. Unlike in Delhi, where women feel insecure because and I see these kind of parallels being often drawn by people sitting in Delhi or in other major cities. And I think that needs to be stopped for Kashmir to be I to be psychologically not treated as an exceptional.
Absolutely, ma'am. I think what you talked about with, Kashmir having a voice of its own, which is, of course, not a homogeneous voice, it's rather a multitude of voices condensed into one necessarily because of the state action that has rendered it as one. I remember reading an article in, I believe, the Swaddle, which talked about how Bollywood portrayed Kashmir. And very similar to what you said, there was a dichotomy. It's either all security, terrorism, violence, or it's all like exotic, Gulmarg, flowers, beautiful. So, in that kind of portrayal of Kashmir, not just in Bollywood, but generally in popular media, where do you see Kashmiris claiming a voice for themselves? Because I hail from the state of Kerala, and when the Kerala story came out, I think the repercussions that it faced, the backlash that came from Kerala, where you had this entire social media campaign where people were, taking pictures of daily life, showing instances of harmony and saying this is the real Kerala story. So, do you see a parallel emerging somewhere in Kashmir with Kashmiri authors and filmmakers, artists trying to claim back a narrative for themselves in this kind of forceful portrayal of them as something they're not?
I think they were trying to do that successfully about a decade ago, and I saw that happening. And that has taken a backseat. You saw these different filmmakers making films which are not the mainstream films. Though we did have one mainstream film which came close to, the Kashmir's reality. And Kashmir's reality would be multi-layered. Not just its different regions, but even if you look at the valley, which is more impacted, it normal life goes side by side with your conflict, and at the same time, it intersects with it. And when outsiders kind of come and try to compartmentalize it, oh, people are going to for picnics, people are going now, things are normal. Nothing is ever normal. You live the whole life, you go about your daily lives get impacted by conflict, sometimes they don't. And this is the normalcy of Kashmir, which I think was being um, articulated in various ways and expressed in various ways through poetry, through art, through books, through fiction, and is. I mean, we recently had some fiction by Kashmiri authors, and even before that. But it may become slow, but there's always a gestation period. In 1990s, I remember that when militancy started and it became difficult to write or express or say anything, the newspapers in Kashmir even went without editorial pages for a year or two. And news was only about, the daily scorecard, as we used to say, very brutally, how many people killed, and then that was all, you know what journalism was reduced to. But after 10 years, 15 years, I think things changed. There is a gestation period. The talent is growing. The thinking is happening. People are reading. People are analyzing. A new generation is, kind of flowering. And it emerges on the scene when the time is ripe. So there would be a time again when I think we already have a generation where, as I said, a decade ago that was happening. So in a few years from now, when they find their space, I think they'll come with a bang this time.
Ma'am, recently the Solicitor General and the Attorney General of India went and submitted in the court that they've ordered the bureaucrats to follow the court orders on internet shutdowns per se. We wanted to get your views on on-ground situation in Kashmir itself. Through the ordeal of Article 370 and then abrogation of statehood and then the union territory phase and now again reinstatement of statehood, how often do we see the exceptional, again, that is how the state frames it, the situation of internet shutdowns? Are they still prevalent and how does it affect the people of Kashmir?
I think not just Kashmir, I think it's happening all over India, and it happens more in peripheral areas. I think you can see the Northeast as an extension of the same thing. Despite the court saying that you cannot have shutdowns for a prolonged period, look at what happened in Manipur. I mean, what would you call a prolonged period? At the end of the day, it's so vague a word, term. Is it a few hours? Is it a few days? Is it, in Manipur was more than a few months. And in Kashmir, what has happened is the bureaucracy has become smarter, so they don't they don't announce an internet ban. They slow down the internet speed overall in the state. It happened when we had these recent natural disasters, the calamities that were happening, and in tandem with that were the communication. Either there was a technical flaw, or deliberately done. We saw it happening, but it wasn't announced. We see it happening more, the internet shutdowns happening in smaller pockets. And sometimes there are orders just as vague, for security reasons, and the, the usual, that without specifying anything. Sometimes there are no orders placed in the public domain. People get to know only after the shutdown is over. And these are because you don't have newspapers that report any longer, so you don't have the reports in the public domain. So it's only activists tracking these internet shutdowns. I think they keep this some data is being maintained on these shutdowns. It's probably still insufficient. There are more shutdowns than there, because, as I said, it's more about slowing down the speeds.
I'm
So
really
you
glad
can't
you
even technically call it an internet shutdown, but it doesn't work.
Internet
slow
slowdown.
down.
It's an
Yeah.
internet slowdown.
I'm really glad you mentioned it because I mean that's news to me. I did not realize that there was this concept of or this kind of machinery of affecting it without really affecting it. But on the topic of
Mhm.
internet shutdowns, ma'am, I don't think we can have a conversation with you and not mention the case you filed in the Supreme Court. So I wanted to ask what led you to file that case, apart from obviously the immediate cause of action being that the situation with the abrogation of Article 370, but I'm assuming there was also some part of you which felt that, there was like a moral impulse that you felt that you needed to file that case, not just for yourself, but for journalists like you. And also, I know that you faced a lot of repercussions for it. Before the matter even closed in the court, you immediately on the ground, you started facing a lot of repercussions with, your office and the Kashmir Times. So what was that like, just as an experience, being in the center of a case like that? What was it like?
It was a call to duty. I mean, as a journalist, I felt I couldn't do my work. As an editor, it was a chilling impact, which unfortunately, why the court did accept there was a chilling impact on overall life, but did not admit that it created a chilling impact for journalists, because the courts will see that newspapers were being published nonetheless. They were not going into what content was being published there. And that, I felt as a journalist, was a little unfair, because there is a difference between a newspaper and a pamphlet, and a journalist and a stenographer. And if the courts failed to make that distinction, that was a little, eh, eh, you know, disappointing. But why I went, I think it was just a chilling impact of it. I was in Jammu, where the broadband was working, but that's not what a larger society relies on. Most people in India rely on the mobile network, and the mobile network wasn't working. Mobile phones in many parts of Jammu region were not working. So people were just pushed behind an iron wall. Whole of Kashmir. And my daily work before August 5th, 2019, was constantly being in touch with people on phone, on WhatsApp, on, through SMSs. I couldn't get through, even people who had landline phones in Kashmir Valley. Wasn't in touch with my bureau chief. Then there were these rumors all over that, random people have been arrested, which included journalists. We didn't know what really was happening in Kashmir. And it's a place with a very, very volatile history. In fact, even the hilly areas of Jammu have had a very volatile past, and so you think of the worst. And when there is no news from these areas, it is something extremely frightening. Um, as a journalist, as a colleague, of people who were working with me, or other journalist friends, I felt concerned, and I felt I needed to speak. As an editor, I felt that I had a duty to bringing these voices. And I felt that if there's no internet today, there was a time when we worked without internet, we worked even without mobile phones, but it doesn't happen in today's age. um so yeah, that's the only thing I could think of.
Ma'am, I also wanted to ask you about the three new bills that are being proposed in the Jammu and Kashmir region itself. The of how do you of restore of the intention of restoring statehood. On paper, at least, they are claiming the noble virtue or noble cause of trying to democratize politics or like trying to decriminalize politics. But on paper, they can actually remove or like demit chief minister's office on ground of some current running criminal allegations per se. So you've talked about in some of your columns that how Kashmir is really a testing ground when it comes to, or it becomes a testing ground when it comes to the others of India. Do you think this is, or like, how would this impact, or regardless of the noble cause that the government is supposedly claiming, how would it in context apply to the politics of Kashmir itself?
I think not just Kashmir, it will apply to rest of India as well. I mean, Kashmir, of course, you have the most powerless government, which exists on papers, but it has powers which are probably less than a panchayat's powers. It has no powers to transfer anyone. It has no powers over education, over health, over anything. I mean, other than I mean, the most that the government can do is issue statements, and even that they're scared to do so. So you can see the powerlessness of these of the present government. And with these laws now in force, and interestingly and very cleverly, so since there is one that also applies to the prime minister, and the prime minister himself is supposedly he's going to recommend his own removal, which is extremely absurd. And who's going to, I mean, at the moment you have the most powerful prime minister in the country, who is who would even dare to lift a finger, where, I mean, the media refuses to ask him questions. The prime minister does not address any press conference. So obviously that does not apply to the prime minister. It's just a kind of mirage, just to show that there is a kind of equalizer. There is no equalizer. The laws are there to target primarily not just the governments ruled by opposition parties, but even their own parties where their own men are not falling in line. I think that that probably, and if you look at what is happening, the jail and not the bail becoming the rule and not the exception. I think that's a very clandestine way of using some allegations to first arrest ministers, chief ministers, who refuse to bow, and then keep them in jail for 30 days, remove them, and yeah, do whatever you want to do. So it's basically a king ruling the country. I mean, where is the democracy? It's
On that note, ma'am, I know, I mean, it sounds like a pessimistic note to end on, so I would like to veer the conversation a little bit and ask you that you mentioned Arundhati Roy at the start about how she was kind of the star name in the 25 books that got banned before we kind of delve deeper and find all the other titles. I think
Mm-hmm.
recently in an interview, she talked about how even somehow throughout the darkest of eras for journalistic freedom or even for freedom in general, writers have emerged through it. And I think that takes a lot of courage. So I want to ask you personally that given all of this context, this socio-political, cultural context, given this atmosphere of fear that's pervading us right now, where do you personally find the courage to speak out and to continue doing the work that you do?
I I don't know if I would call it courage. I would just call it a choice. Uh, either the only other choice I find is to become silent, which means a surrender. So that thought of surrendering kind of, to me, sounds like, okay, I've declared myself dead, and I don't like the sound of it. So the only other option is to fight back and say something. The only way is, you can be a little cautious, you can use a different language, but y- yeah, to navigate that fear. So your tone can change, your way of saying a certain thing can change, but you're fighting nonetheless, and that clearly is at the moment the only option for me.
Ma'am, in your most recent article, you talked about how we are entering a new Raj of Brown Sahibs. In such a state, and love the sentence, ma'am, by the way. And like in such a state, do you think what forms of resistance are most urgent? Do you think it should be something stemming from journalism, or should it be something like you talked about the civil society, or should be something of interpersonal communication, or like understanding Kashmiris, or like what is most urgent? Do you think?
I think first of all of it, basically. But first of all, journalists. I think the independence of journalism, and that's not only for journalists within Jammu and Kashmir. They need to be able to write independently. Of course, there is, local journalists would sometimes be a little hamstrung with their own issues, but then, we can't have parachuted journalists. We need Indian journalists to be a little more sensitive and sensitized about the sensibilities of Kashmir. Not see it as a piece of territory and report more fairly. I think the more we report, the more there are the different shades of Jammu and Kashmir that appear in the public domain, the more we would know about the region, the more we would know about the complexities. I and then, of course, simultaneously there is a role of the civil society as well, because you need to look for solutions, you need to find ways to resolve it. So unless and until first and foremost need is for information to be there, when there is no information, how can you understand an issue? How can you understand each other? How can you, so you first the information, then the conversations, and then it has to be a continuously simultaneous process.
Ma'am, on a personal note, I wanted to ask you one final question. If it is that any advice that you want to share with us, young minds, students of not just law but other disciplines who are like the future of the country, future of the India's next country, about not only preserving integrity but like persevering integrity, especially in a time like this where talking or like even expressing truth itself is so costly.
Mm-hmm. um First of all, I think I get a sense of, um let me admit, I'm inspired. I'm inspired when students in today's age, in this age when there is immense fear, when there is so much repression, um, still look at things with hope, want to learn, want to know, want to do something for the country. I think that's extremely inspiring. If I look back, I don't know, I may have been a different person if I was your age when and I was going through all this. So I think that you're going perfectly well. In fact, you give us inspiration. Um, hang in there, I would say, because this is not going to last forever. Things are difficult, but try and be more creative. And I'm sure the future of India would be in good hands, because you people who've gone through adversity are probably emerge out, not just probably, I think certainly emerge out stronger. So you'll be a much stronger generation than ours. And yeah, so more creative, stronger, able to resist and find ways to navigate issues.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Not just for that lovely answer, but also for this entire an hour or so that you spent talking with us on so many different things.
Thank you.
I think
Pleasure talking.
at the outset, I knew that it's not every day that you get to talk with a voice like yours. So we wanted to make the most out of this opportunity, but I don't think we quite anticipated the extent to which we'll touch on issues, because it's rare that we really give so much emphasis to emotions and feelings in a podcast like this. But I believe the issue of Kashmir and the issue of India today broadly is one that requires us to tap into that emotional side, of what we feel, not just what we think, but what we feel about the developments that are happening. And as you said, having hope is such an important aspect of that, to continue to feel hope and to continue to feel inspired by the coming generations, by the generation before us, and the generation that we're inhabiting right now. So, thank you so much for your time and for your answers, for telling us so much about not just what's the on ground situation, what is it like, but what do you hope for it to be like? Because I think that's what really matters at the end of the day. So, thank you so much for this conversation, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am. It was again
Thank
like
you
I
so
just
much.
like to add to what Soundarya said. Like, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to like grace us on Not Why But How podcast. Not just on the behalf of the public policy group itself, but on the behalf of the NALSA student body, but also the larger demographic that we are hoping that this entire conversation reaches. Thank you so much, ma'am. It's been a pleasure to host you.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.